Well, good morning and welcome everybody to this conversation. You've got to already see him a little bit and hear him share some of his own poetry as well as the Mary Oliver poem. But we are thrilled to have with us this morning Joe Davis. Joe, welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm grateful to be here. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, so we're so excited to get to know you and to hear a little more of your work here this morning. So thank you for being here. As we're kind of wanting to get to know you a little bit, I'm just so curious about what it is like to be a spoken word poet, an artist, an activist, and all these different components that are a part of who you are and this calling that you have. I don't really know exactly what it was like pre-pandemic, and I can only imagine what it's like now in this last year where everything has been turned upside down. I mean, so many of the gatherings that would have been a part of your everyday, every week life at least are different now. So maybe just kind of start off by letting us know, what are you up to these days? What does a day in the life or a week in the life of Joe Davis look like these days?
Yeah. As you said, all those things you listed are very much a part of like who I am, part of my identity. I say I'm a man of many hats, literally and metaphorically.
Yeah.
And so, at pre-pandemic, I was touring pretty regularly. I would travel all across the country to different, schools, universities, community spaces, churches, and I would either speak or I'd be doing a creative writing, a performance workshop, or I'd be performing poetry. And then when the pandemic really hit hard and we went into quarantine, shelter in place, I had a flood of cancellations in my inbox. And so I was like, oh my goodness, like what am I gonna do? Like this is my livelihood. I've been in the gig economy for like a decade now, and I didn't have any gigs. And so I did have a moment where I was like kind of freaking out and I didn't know what was next. But I really am indebted to the community. And I just thank God that I have these relationships with folks, with people like you, right? Who still are saying, hey, we appreciate the poetry, we appreciate the art, and we're still doing things. We're still connecting with people online, virtually, right? And so I did have teachers and pastors and just friends and folks I know throughout the community who are saying, hey, we still would love to work with you. And so I'm really grateful for that. I've been able to do what I love just the same. It's just on a different platform now. So yeah.
Very cool.
That's kind of how it's been. And some of the things I've been doing, like I've been working with a lot of high schools. I do a lot of creative writing sessions with students. And then I'm also teaching an online anti-racism class with one of my friend and colleagues, David Shear. We're both what's called intercultural development qualified administrators. And so we teach from this framework of bridging across cultural differences, really gray space kind of, online community that we formed where folks can just come in and be vulnerable, be authentic, and talk about, what they're struggling with along the lines of culture and race, but also lean deeper into an abundant mindset and say, hey, we already have tools and gifts and practices that we can develop together as a group, as a collective. So I've been holding that space. And then I get to perform poetry and share poetry all over the place. So that's kind of what my life looks like pretty regularly.
Yeah.
So you're not just a spoken word poet. I mean, you do many things, like what you said, for many hats. I can relate. I don't know, when you're a creative person, you focus on what you want to do, but also you have to kind of learn to do other things,
Yeah.
Here's what I'm curious about, Mr. Joe Davis. Creative individuals, I'm curious about how you got to where you're at, especially as a spoken word poet, but I'm curious also how you got to where you're at now with the activism and the speaking and the teaching kind of thing too. But I think a lot of creative people, we begin our lives thinking we have to do something practical, we have to be a doctor or a fireman, whatever. But there's this transition that we experienced into the creative way of doing things. What was that process for you? Beginning, realizing that you're good at this to deciding then to do it to bring in your income and to, kind of live into your calling, I guess.
Yeah. I definitely consider it a calling because it kept calling me whether or not I wanted to pick up right away, right?
Yes.
And you all know how that goes with your vacation, when God has a call in your life. But even as a little kid, it was already there. It was already present. I was a very imaginative kid, very playful and creative kid. I would always be in my room, like coming up with stories, playing make-believe and dancing. And I was even in school, I was the kid in the back of the class drawing like funny pictures of my teachers. I would do caricatures and comic strips, and I would write these little love letters to my schoolyard crush, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that was a part of my upbringing as a child. And my parents, thankfully, they fostered that and they encouraged that, and they gave me the space to just live more fully into that. And so I'm grateful for that. I never knew, though, as a kid, I never knew that I could actually do that as a career.
Yeah.
Like, that never occurred to me. I was just doing what I loved, following my passion. But it wasn't until I had some really influential teachers and mentors in my life who said, hey, you're a strong writer. You're a strong storyteller. You should share this with the group. And at first, I was kind of shy and kind of hesitant because I didn't know what the response was going to be with me sharing my innermost, like, vulnerable feelings and things that I had crafted just for myself or just for play and fun, and some of it was really intimate and like talked about my struggles, right? But ultimately, what happened when I shared, people related to it and they connected to it, and I felt like there were some times when even I wasn't aware of the time, but I would almost give other people permission to be vulnerable and give other people permission to go deep and to share. And then when I saw them do it, I was like, oh, wow, that wasn't so scary. That didn't look so bad. Maybe I can do this more. And so I began to share more and more and more, and realize that for me, I always say that art helps us feel less alone and more alive. And that's what it did for me. And so at that point in time, it didn't matter whether it was as a career or in what capacity. I just had to do it. So
did you have any mentors that, or like people that you saw kind of leading the example for you to kind of mimic or imitate at first? Or did you feel like you had to kind of come up with your own way of doing things?
I would actually say a little bit of both. So as a young artist, like when I was first coming up, I didn't see a lot of professional artists who were doing this full time. And so I was just kind of reaching. I would read lots of books. I would watch like stuff on YouTube, interviews, and just like study other artists and authors and speakers and poets that I admired. And so there was a lot of searching and a lot of self-discovery, even learning what tools and practices I already had to like unearth within my own self. But then I did meet some really amazing mentors throughout my life. I definitely got a shout out, like who now is one of my best friends, David Shear. A lot of people know him as Agape. He invited me to go on tour with him, like over a decade ago now, I want to say. And I would just like do poetry in between sets. And then we started to actually write songs together and start to tell stories together. We would be touring on the road, and we just formed a really great friendship. And so now we like do everything together, right? But he definitely been a big influence. And then I think about just pastors, like I'm sure we were going to eventually talk about Lutheran campus ministry somewhere in this conversation, but yeah. And so the reason why I'm even Lutheran is because of a pastor through Lutheran campus ministry, and they were really influential in me. Speaking in front of people, inviting me to be what they called a peer minister, where I would help organize the ministry events on campus, but I would also like lead Bible study and lead different events we had. And I never knew that I could even do that sort of thing until they invited me to do it, and kind of pulled that out of me, saw that potential. I always say when there's good teachers and good mentors and they see potential in somebody, they're not going to give up. They're going to keep like pulling it out of them and gently nudging. And that's what I needed, because like sometimes I didn't even know what I was capable of, what I had the potential to actually do and to lead. But I'm super grateful for those people in my life who kept pushing me and challenging me lovingly, to blossom and to live more fully into who God has called and created me to be.
Well, Joe, you kind of hinted at this whole campus ministry and sort of your journey of discovery too. And so I'm kind of curious, as you thought about, reflected, how has spirituality or faith been a part of your process and been a part of who you've been called to be. I love that language that you're using.
Yeah, it's definitely like an essential part of who I am, an essential part of my story. I grew up going to church pretty frequently. I jokingly say we went to church like 15 times a week. Like,
Yeah.
I grew up in a Black Pentecostal church, and so my mother is a missionary. My dad is a deacon, and so I was always going, you know, Monday through Sunday. Like, we had something going on. And I would be reading Easter speeches and doing Christmas plays, and so that was a huge part of my life. And then, but what was cool about it is that even though that was very central part of my life, I was also going to other churches with some of my friends. Like, I went to Presbyterian churches and Baptist churches and eventually like Lutheran churches with my friends too. So I saw God and ways that people worshiped in a multitude of expressions. And so I was always really affirming of that. And it wasn't until I went to college that I really started to deepen my connection with Lutheran tradition in particular, because I had a campus minister who just happened to be the campus pastor of the school I went to at Minot State University, and just like really fell in love with the way they led that community. Every spring break we would go on a missions trip, but it wasn't this sort of like kind of exploitative, extractive, tokenizing mission trip, right? It was where we went and we just like dug deep into the community and built relationships where, like, for instance, after Hurricane Katrina hit, we actually went down to Katrina. We went down to the 5th Ward in New Orleans, or no, it was the 9th Ward. Sorry, we went down to the 9th Ward in New Orleans, and we just stayed there and got to know people and helped clean up. And then there was one time we went once, and instead of, every spring break we went somewhere different. One time we went to Denver, and we went to Denver Urban Ministries. And I met Nadia Bowles-Weber. I didn't even know who she was at the time, but I met her for the first time. I was like, who is she? Seems got all these tats, and like she's just really bringing it home with her theology. And so we worked with her and her church. We worked with folks experiencing homelessness, folks in the addiction community who were recovering community. And like I had all these experiences as part of Lutheran Campus Ministries that really showed me what was possible when they say, we're going to be the hands and feet of Christ. I was like, wow, this is really how you do it. And so now I endearingly say that I'm a Luther Costal.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love it.
I still got the Pentecostal roots where I grew up with the Hammond B3 organ and the tambourine and like the exuberant praise and worship. Like that's in me. That's never going to leave. And I really love the way that accompaniment and that grace, that theology of grace and being the hands and feet of Christ that I've encountered in the Lutheran church. And so I bring both with me in my spiritual practice. Yeah, definitely.
That's really cool.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Joe, I'm wondering, we read the words and we just fell in love with God is within us. Would you speak that for us?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's just one of my favorite pieces to share. I wrote this just exploring just this immanence and transcendence of God, how God is within us and all around us, and just the mysterious ways that the Spirit of God moves. I don't fully understand it, but I experience it, and I'm grateful for it. And so that's what this piece is about. It goes like this. God is within us, the source of all light and life and love, the creator of the universe, the one word to one verse to one chapter to birth, heaven and earth, before and after, the first breath to stretch across the dark abyss, to impart a kiss pressed against the empty lips of existence. God is within us, beyond the lips, beyond the script, beyond description of words or worlds, and awestruck wonder under every involuntary movement of heart or blood or lungs or every secret change whispered down the infinite ear of mystery. God is within us. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. That was
Lovely.
beautiful.
Oh my gosh, it's like music to my ears. You know, I've been thinking, how does he do it? You know, as a musician, we are taught to sight read music and to communicate it, you know, as it's written in the moment. And when you read the Mary Oliver piece, I don't know if you practiced it before, but I'm just curious. What's that?
So I read it a couple of times prior, but I didn't like, rehearse it.
Yeah. And how do you do it? How do you look at a piece of poetry and know what to say and how to say it? And, you know, I think poetry can be kind of elusive to, I think, a large portion of the population because we don't experience it all that often. And hearing someone like you, just incredibly talented in communicating the sense of poetry in an accessible way, what would you say to someone, like any of us? How do you read poetry to get the most out of it? Because, you know, looking at Mary Oliver's poetry, even the format suggests a way. You know, there's beauty even in the format of how it's written.
Yeah, I love that question. Like, thank you so much for asking that, because something I care a great deal about is opening up poetry to be more accessible for people and making it demystified, right? Because I think we really do have a lot of disconnect and distance from poetry. I even experienced some of that early on in school. Like, some poetry can just seem really dry and really boring, depending on how it's presented, right? And that oftentimes are people's first experiences with poetry is in that tone, in that way, right? But thankfully, I also encountered poets and poetry that was really enlivening, and I saw myself reflected. Like, some of the first poetry that I encountered was Langston Hughes when I was a little kid, and I have this book called Pass It On: Poems for African American Children. I remember flipping through the pages and had these just gorgeously illustrated images where I saw like myself reflected. I saw people who looked like my mom and my dad and my sister and me. I read the words of Maya Angelou and Nikki Giovanni and Paul Laurence Dunbar. And so I found poetry that resonated with me. And that goes back to what I said about how art can make us feel less alone and more alive. And I feel that once we are able to tap into that in the words, tap into that in whatever we're hearing or whatever we're reading, that's when it really comes alive, right? And so, you know, for instance, even Shakespeare, right? Shakespeare can be really boring, or Shakespeare can be really exciting. It depends on how you connect with it, right? When you're able to find that raw, relatable humanness and unearth that in whatever piece. And so my invitation for people is to ask questions of whatever you're engaging with, and to listen long enough until you hear the humanity that's there, until you hear that spark that you can connect with.
And that's a process. Like, that's not, you can't do that instantly.
Right, exactly.
I find that in music. There's a song that I just have been learning recently, and it was just dry to me. I was just reading it, but I had to look at it in the humanity, how I would sing it, how I would respond to it. And gosh, I totally know what you're talking about. Wow. Yeah,
it's definitely a practice and a process. Like, even, you know, I think about instruments as well, right? Like, if you're just gonna pick up a horn or pick up a guitar, having never played it, you can maybe mess around with it and it might not sound as harmonious, right? If you're just picking it up. But the more you explore and the more you play and the more you practice, you start to find your voice, right? You start to know how to blow and how to what to press. You start to know how to strum and what keys, you know. And so it is a process, an ongoing, an exploration and experimentation. So,
you know, I kind of hear some connected themes in this poem that you just did for us in the God is Within Us, from a lot of the Mary Oliver poetry we read about. I mean, so much of her poetry is about creation and finding God in creation and within us. You know, like I feel like that's kind of a theme that she keeps coming back to too. I don't know if my question is more process or just inspiration, you know, but like, so how do you approach, you know, how does that you go from an idea in your mind to words on paper or like typed out to like, you know, being able to share them like you share here with us today?
Yeah, it's different depending on the poem.
Yeah.
Sometimes the inspiration just hits, and it's like capturing lightning in a bottle, and I gotta try to gather it and like receive what I oftentimes feel like God is just speaking to me through poetry, through the music, right? And I gotta try to be present to receive that. And then other times it's a really contemplative, meditative process where I'm really just listening. I just sit down with, you know, sometimes I type on my computer or write on my phone. Other times there's something really intimate and special about just writing, handwriting. But I just really sit there, I quietly listen, and I reflect. It can be a longer process. Kind of just depends. Both happen pretty regularly, but I always have time set aside each day where I'm writing. Because that for me is like a spiritual practice, really. Writing is a way that I have a deeper understanding of the world and who I am and how I'm connected with God, connected with other people. And so, yeah, it happens different ways, but it's just for me, it's really about listening and about my attentiveness. How am I paying attention to, you know, what I feel the Spirit is speaking to me, and how am I being responsive to the relationships that I have with, you know, those who are in my life and with my community. I always want to speak to my community. I always want to speak about my experience of the divine, my experience with God. And so that's what poetry, you know, that space of poetry.
Gosh, I think two things really stand out to me about, you know, this practice of, you know, we've had kind of the practice of reading, you know, Mary Oliver's poetry during Lent and kind of going back to it. And, you know, likewise in hearing yours and reading some of the poetry you shared with us, two things that really strike me are, one, kind of the poet's vision of the world, right? Like just seeing through or seeing deeper in than I feel like I do. I mean, maybe comedians do this in a similar way, kind of seeing the world maybe a little differently or deeply. And then two, just communicating it in such a succinct way. Like, you know, I just can't get over like your efficient use of language. Like as a pastor, I talk too much, right? Like I just go on and on to try to make a point. And then in like 30 seconds, you deliver this just like, you know, I could sit with, you know, God is within us, even just the title alone for like hours and just think like that is deep. Just the way you speak those few words. You know, I guess, like that was just kind of is on my mind. And I don't know if there's, you know, I guess my question is like, how do you do that? But like, you know, I mean, I think that's kind of what you've been talking about already.
Yes, Joe, how do you do that? Nathan needs to learn.
Yeah. I mean, I think we all have the ability to do it. Like my theory is that I think everybody is a poet. Everyone has a poet within them, even if they have to like dig deep to unearth it. Right. But for me, it's really this process. Again, I keep going back to process for some reason, but this practice and process of just like listening and paying attention, because for me, it's been a commitment that I've like committed and recommitted to throughout my life. I think that's why I'm able to kind of to dig into it and then access it. But I think anybody can do it. It's just a matter of like, how are you going to commit to that practice and process? Like, are you going to create the space to really just be reflective and meditative and attentive? I keep thinking about music too, right? Like we think about skilled musicians, and the reason why they're so skilled is because they spent that time with knowing their instrument, right? Intimately, like learning their instrument. And so I think it's the same thing with words and with stories. And there's a certain vulnerability to it as well. I think I have a willingness to be vulnerable with myself and with others. And I think there's a lot of truth and beauty in that space too. So
well, I'm wondering if you'd share another poem with us. Is there anything that's kind of on your heart or mind that you think would be a good one to share with us here this morning?
Yeah, there's this piece called Truth Seeker that I've been talking a lot about, like digging deep and like committing to practices, and I think this piece kind of speaks to that, so I could share that. It's a really short one. I'm a truth seeker because I know the truth's deeper than what you see first on the surface. I'm a truth seeker because I know the truth's deeper than a Google or Wikipedia search. I'm a truth seeker because I know the truth's deeper than what the media is spoon feeding us by force. You got to dig deep into the root, dig deep into the fruit, to the sweet juice to seep deep into you till you need any proof. What you seek is seeking you. What you seek is seeking you till you need any proof. What you seek is seeking you. Truth seeker. It's that piece right there. Yeah, it's a real short piece.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Now I want to see it.
Yeah.
I want to see it as you read it. There's just, I love it.
Oh, yeah. And the visual way poems are written, like you noted about Mary Oliver, right? There's an art form and an intentionality around that as well. So,
have you published these in a book, in a collection at all?
Not yet. And so I oftentimes get that request. Say, hey, we want to get a book. We want to see it. And so I haven't done that yet. My intention, I've been kind of collecting some of my stuff and organizing it and gathering it. So that's kind of the next move, is for me to publish a book, because I'm such a part of the oral tradition of like, sharing it as spoken word. But I do see the beauty and the value in like having it in a book and sharing that with others too. So I need to get to it. Every time I hear that, I'm like, yeah, I'm working on it. I need to just make it happen. So
yeah, well, don't forget your friends at Elk River Lutheran when it comes out. We'll be looking for it.
Yeah,
I'll give you a signed copy. I got you. Just remind me.
Yes, all right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. Well, the truth seeker, I think that's the calling for all of us. And I'm really kind of curious, like, you've practiced that, in a lot of ways, but I really see you've kind of mentioned both the activism and the education. I think some of that work that you're doing, around that, and kind of using your gifts to communicate and invite people into deep and even sometimes hard conversations is a really powerful and important kind of work and ministry and calling that you're in the midst of now. Would you want to share a little more about, like, what have you been doing in some of those venues as well?
Yeah. I definitely see that as gospel work. Like, I feel like the work of, deepening our relationships, and reconciliation and healing and justice, like that is the gospel. Like, God's dream for the world is for us to be in right relationship with God, with each other, with the earth. And I think holding spaces where we can have conversations about that and develop practices around that, that's the gospel work. That's what we're all called to do in various capacities, right? And so a lot of what I do, again, like pre-COVID, I would do so much in person, like a lot of in-person facilitation, and have like conversations around, interculturality or anti-racism. But now I'm doing I've actually developed an 8-week online course with my friend David Shear. And so we're just started a new course right now, and we've been just doing cycles of them. So we'll have a cohort where it'll be about like 15 to 20 people, and we meet every week for 2 hours, and we have a curriculum that we've developed. So we'll share from that curriculum, but then we'll also have space to actually practice the curriculum and to internalize it. Because so many times when we talk about justice work or interculturality or anti-racism, it becomes intellectual. We intellectualize it, we get stuck in our heads, and there's these abstract concepts that are distant and way out there, and we forget that all this stuff impacts our bodies and impacts us right here, right now. Like, when Christ came, Christ said, "This is my body given to you." He didn't say, this is my theological dissertation, or these are the top 10 like scriptures on my list, the self-help book, or like he was like saying, "This is my body given to you," when he walked alongside people and then said, "Go and do likewise," And so for me, like, I want to be in a community of practice. I want to be in a space where we're embodying what we're learning together. And so that's really what I try to create the space for, is spaces where we can do the thing and not just talk about the thing, right? And we're gonna mess up. It's gonna get messy, and we're gonna say and do things and make mistakes. But that's why there's grace, right? And so that's really the work that I'm involved in when it comes to activism. Sometimes I kind of laugh at the word activism, because I think that it's funny that people who just care about their neighbor are called activists, right? Like,
oh yes,
you want people to have a home and clean water and clean air and have their human dignity honored, you're called an activist. I'm like, I'm just trying to do what God calls me to do. Like,
yes. No, I appreciate that. That's really so point. Funny. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're a caring, decent person. Oh, one of those activists.
Right. Who cares about other human beings?
That's so radical.
Right. Oh my God.
Well, and that's the sad kind of, I think, reality is that in some ways, some of that caring is radical. One of the things when I looked at your website, I saw that you had the show up sweatshirts and stuff even. And, I think that is, so could you talk a little bit about show up? And I mean, I know it's even a piece that you have, right? And stuff. But I guess, what does that mean for you? Because I think that's an important thing for all of us in all these different venues of life, because of I've heard you talk about before a little bit. I know a little bit of what's behind that, behind the cool sweatshirts and stuff. Is this great big idea that I think has a deep truth in, like, even for my family at home, the way I show up for my family, the way I show up for my church, the way I show up for my community, and I think in the greater context of all that's happened in the last year in the pandemic, but also last year, we're out here in Elk River, but that's not that far from Minneapolis, where George Floyd is killed. And I know you've been active in that community and back then, but now still too. And so, I think even for us as white folks, what does it mean to show up is something that we all need to be wrestling with. And so I guess the showing up for you, what led you to that phrase and what's all behind it? Because I think it's so powerful.
Yeah. So to me, it feels like a movement, to be honest. It kind of just started as a mantra, as affirmation, as a reminder of the beauty and power of showing up. And I think that if we choose to show up as our authentic selves, we choose to show up and be present and say, hey, I'm going to give my best. And my best today might look different than it did yesterday, because we all know we've been going through it like this past year. And so, but if we're still saying, hey, I'm gonna give my best is going to look different each day, right? But that's still what I'm going to choose. I'm going to be present, to be authentic, to be in integrity, to just offer what God has called me to offer to the world. I think the moment we make that decision, I think something powerful happens. I always like to say, like, we will do our best and the Holy Spirit will do the rest, right? Because sometimes we get overwhelmed looking at the grandiosity, how big some of the problems of the world can be, right? Especially when we look at historic problems and systemic problems. But I think that if we really just look right here, right now, and just bloom where we're planted, right, and realize that we have power. One of my favorite quotes I've been coming back to lately is by Alice Walker. She says that the most common way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any. And I like to say, like, we're not all powerful, but we are all powerful. Like, meaning that, like, we don't have the power that the Holy Spirit does, that God does, right? But we each do have a power to show up, right? We're not called to save the world. Like, that's God's going to do that. God is going to save the world. But we are called to show up as our authentic, unapologetic selves in a way that's loving and that's compassionate, doing what we can where we can. And so that's really what showing up means to me. Is like looking at what power do we have? What can we change? What can we say? What can we do? We have family members that we can have conversations with. We have, whatever places that we work at, we have influence. We have money and resources. How are we sharing those things in a way that's equitable and that's just and that's compassionate, right? That's what showing up means to me. It's really like coming from this abundance mindset and saying, God has blessed us with so many good gifts. How can we share these good gifts with the world, with those that we're in community with? I wrote this piece, as I said, just as a reminder. Like, I know I need this reminder for myself just as much as anyone else may need it. And so I'm grateful that it can kind of serve as that, to bring people back down to a place of grounding and centering and connectedness, to say, hey, this is important to be right here, right now, to show up. So it goes like this. We've each been called to this place, this time, and this season. You may not yet know the rhyme or the reason. You may not feel, think, or believe in the same things I believe in. We've been asked to show up. Show up wherever you are from. You can come here to be free. Bring your full selves, both your head and your heart, your hands and your feet, and anything and everything infinitely beyond any duality, your sexuality, gender, race, age, or ability. We all have the ability to be. Without you, I am incomplete. Without you, there is no we. I need you not just to survive, but to thrive, become fully awake and alive with potential and possibility. Join me at the table, for it is wide and there's lots of food to eat. So show up and be fed and feed others, satiating a different kind of hunger, fueling the fire in our bellies. No matter what journey you're on, where you've been or what you've done, all will be well when we're all welcome to laugh, cry, dance, right, breathe, and bleed into the margins and follow the call to the false reaches of who we are. Whether you run, walk, crawl, even if you fall, we fall in love. But just show up. Show up to answer God's call to justice, to transform both the soul and the bodily world the soul inhabits. Show up with all your awkwardness and bad habits. Show up with your doubts and your questions. And when here, you can ask them. Show up with your wounds and your scars. We all have baggage, but know that together we can unpack it. This is no mistake. You're not here by accident. You are here to share the stories of your sacred passage. You are the only you that ever has been. You are not the magician. You are the magic. So show up to this place here where there is no grace period. There's only grace, period. Bring your fears and insecurities. Let us marvel in the mystery. Let us listen each other to life with a deep, holy listening. Can you hear it? Can you hear it? That is the sound of the genuine within you. The spirit stirring near you, but if you don't show up, how can anyone hear you? Show up. Even if you don't know for certain, you may have the truth and healing for which this world is searching. In this grand universe, we are but small workers with a big purpose. Because of our hearts widening the circle, hearts that are broken, hearts that are open, so a little light can shine through, a little hope for the hopeless. Wherever you go, simply know the spirit of this place goes with you. So go. Ready with sleeves rolled up, always growing, never fully grown up, ready with all your heart, mind, body, and soul, simply to show up. Thank y'all for showing up today.
Wow.
Gosh, thank you.
I love it.
I feel like we need an amen after that one.
Yeah,
Amen.
Thank you for
amen
that.
indeed. You know,
Yeah.
we just can't thank you enough for being with us here this morning and sharing your poetry and your bearing your soul. You know, I think, you know, the vulnerability you spoke about earlier, I mean, yeah, your words are a window into your soul and a glimpse of how you see the world around you, and it is beautiful. I mean, we are blessed for hearing it and experiencing it. So thank you, Joe. I'm just curious, where if people want to find more of your work and follow you, like on social and stuff, like where can people find more Joe Davis?
Yeah. If they want to connect, joedavispoetry.com. Have a lot of videos and poems and ways to connect there. And then if you just type in Joe Davis Poetry on any social media, if you go to Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or YouTube, just type in Joe Davis Poetry, you'll find my page. So.
Good. Well, if you see an influx of followers from Elk River, Minnesota, in the next few days, you'll know why. Because we're just so blessed to have you here with us, and we'll look forward to the day when you can maybe be out here in person and
Absolutely.
We can get a little more. We'd sure love that. So
absolutely, I would love to join y'all in person. Hopefully here, we'll see. When outside opens back up, we'll make it happen.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much, Joe. We've just been blessed by you. Thanks for being here.
Right on. Yeah. Until next time.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Joe.